there. I was just playing a few examples from this book, Pentatonic Concepts by Steve Kahn. So Steve Kahn is a very well-known guitarist and a producer, and he's played on tons of records. He's like a session guitarist. He's mostly known for his kind of Latin fusion thing, I guess. And this is his book from 2002, I think. So it covers pentatonic scales. There is a very well-known book for pentatonic scales called Pentatonics by Jerry Bergonzi, which I have covered before. And which one should I get? You were asking. You should get both. They're a little bit different. This is for horns, I guess, whereas Steve Kahn's book it's a guitar-oriented book with tabs and all that stuff. So there's a few things in here that this book doesn't cover. I have covered this book in previous lessons. But today we'll take a look at this, so let's get started, shall we? So the Jerry Bergonzi book covers a whole bunch of different pentatonic scales, kind of hybrid pentatonic scales, I guess you could call them. But when we talk about the pentatonic scales, we talk about this, which is a minor pentatonic, right? That's a G minor pentatonic, also B flat, major pentatonic. Guitar players tend to think of those scales as minor, because that's usually the first scale we learn. When we use pentatonic scales in jazz, it's different from what we normally do with the pentatonic scale when we learn how to play blues. So we need to separate those things. We're not doing the kind of... So I'm not making fun of that or diminishing that, but that's something else. This is more like John Coltrane would use pentatonic scales, is what we're aiming for, or Chick Corea. So let's call that the normal pentatonic. The other pentatonic this book covers, the Steve Kahn book, is what he calls the dominant. So like a C dominant pentatonic. So that's basically the same scale as the previous one with one note difference. So instead of F, it's an E natural. Which gives you kind of a Santana kind of sound. So those two scales kind of work together. They're very similar. They work of the same kind of situation. Sometimes. Let's just make sure that we have these scales. I am pretty sure that most of you, or if not all of you, can do this. Play a G minor pentatonic, go to the next position. So let's just do that. Grab your guitar. Okay, so let's start from G. Okay, let's do the other one. If you find yourself struggling with that, then you need to work on that scale. Because I think that is as important as the normal pentatonic scale. So you can think of that as a C dominant pentatonic scale, which is 1, 2, 3, 5, flat 7, 1. Or you can think of it as a G minor, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. So a minor 6. I think the Bergonzi book calls it minor 6 pentatonic, but I think most people think of it as a dominant. if you think of it as a G minor 6 kind of scale, it's like a G minor 6 chord, like arpeggio with an added 4th degree. If you are a gypsy jazz player or early jazz player, you know that G minor 6 and E minor 7 flat 5, it's kind of the same chord in that world. Even Barry Harris, I think, talks about those chords as the same thing pretty much. Essentially, they are the same thing, the same notes. That means that you can use this scale over an E minor 7 flat 5 as well, since it's essentially the same thing as a G minor 6. This is gonna help us later on when we're gonna look at minor 2-5-1s. So keep that in mind. We're gonna get back to that later on. So then there's a bunch of backing tracks that you can practice these scales over. So they work over, let's say you have a G minor 7 going to C7, right? Both those scales work, or in combination, over a vamp like that. Or even if it's just G minor, the G minor vamp and the C7 vamp, or C sus. One of the kind of secrets of jazz that you kind of discover after playing for many years, in my opinion, is that you realize that those chords, G minor 7, C dominant, like a regular dominant, or a sus, they're all kind of the same thing, the same material you can use over that. Like G Dorian, it's the same as C mixo, the bob scales. Same thing as Barry Harris talks about when you see a 2-5, G minor to C7, just think C7. So let's say we have a vamp like that. So it's got that little bit of Santana flavor. So that's the minor 6 pentatonic or C dominant. Or the normal minor pentatonic. They both work. And again, when you're using pentatonics in a jazz context, we're not thinking about the blues scale. Even though you can add that flavor as well. But I want you to think of it more like kind of shapes, like that one. And the Bergonzi book is packed with those kinds of shapes. Kind of saxophone-ish. So you want to be able to play those shapes in all positions. There it is. And on the scale as well. Just the same shape, same pattern, the dominant pentatonic, when I add a little bit of rhythmic phrasing to it. Another thing we have to remember is that if we play a normal pentatonic, we can superimpose it. So if we have a F major chord, I can play the D minor pentatonic or F major. Or I can play an A minor pentatonic. Or if I want a Lydian sound, I can play E minor pentatonic. So within the diatonic key, you can find 3 normal pentatonic scales. And this book is very good at explaining how those pentatonic scales work over each chord, because you need to be aware of what extensions you're creating when you're playing the superimposed major pentatonics. The normal pentatonic you can find in 3 degrees on the major scale, which means that you can play 3 different normal pentatonics over a diatonic chord, but you have to consider the avoid note. It might not work if it contains the avoid note. The dominant pentatonic you only find on 1 degree of a major tonality or a diatonic key, which is from the 5th degree. So if we're in the key of F, it starts on the 5th degree. There is no other place in that key where you can create that scale. However, in melodic minor or jazz minor, you only find the normal pentatonic on 1 scale degree, the 2nd degree. And you can find the dominant pentatonic on 2 different degrees, the 4th and the 5th degree, I think. Yeah, so if I'm in C melodic minor, I can play an F dominant pentatonic and a G pentatonic dominant pentatonic. Or F. And I can play a normal D minor pentatonic. So the challenge here is to hear how the pentatonic scale work over different chords. It can give you the meat of the chord, like all the chord tones, but it could also be a pentatonic that gives you the extensions of a chord, which is gonna make it more vague sounding, it's gonna challenge your ears. That's why it's very important to know how the different degrees work again. And if you're confused by all that, I really recommend this book, because it really does a good job of laying out all the pentatonic scales and how they apply. So you have this kind of diagrams, and it's very well done in that sense. Here, for example, we have all the pentatonic options and how they apply to the chords and what the extensions are. We're gonna get to that, so bear with me. But again, it's only those 2 pentatonics. Whereas the Jerry Bergonzi book talks about the major flat 6 pentatonics and all these kind of more obscure pentatonic scales, which are great, but when I play, I don't really think about those scales. They're not really practical. But going through that book and working on those scales improved my understanding of melodic minor especially, so I think it's worth the effort to play those scales, because it's going to help your playing in many ways. But when I play, again, those scales are not in my awareness, whereas these 2 scales, we use them all the time. They're much more applicable or practical. Now let's get to the interesting part of this book, in my opinion, which is how to use these scales over a 2-5-1, both in major and a 2-5-1 in minor. So let's say I have a 2-5-1 in B flat major, so C minor 7, F7, B flat major. Over the C minor, I can play a G minor pentatonic. Over the F7, I can play A flat minor pentatonic. And over the B flat major 7, I can play A minor pentatonic. It could sound something like this. That's one of the licks from the book. I played that in the beginning, so it's example 10. play more of an altered chord over the F, you're gonna hear it better. And a Lydian chord here. So how does this work, you might ask? Well, so the G minor pentatonic over C minor 7 gives you a 5th, a flat 7 root, and the 9th, and the 11th. A flat minor gives you a, over the F, gives you a sharp 9, flat 5 or sharp 11, sharp 5, flat 7, and a flat 9. And the A minor pentatonic over the B flat major 7 gives you a 7th, 9, 3, sharp 11, 13. So we're deriving this, the G minor pentatonic over the C minor 7 from just a key. So the F7 altered is a mode of the melodic minor, and in melodic minor we can only find the normal pentatonic scale on 1 degree. So that's the one we find. So that works over altered. It's not the best scale over altered if you ask me, but it's also very good to work on this scale. And the last pentatonic scale we find in Lydian, so we're borrowing it from F major, which is the same scale as B flat Lydian. So you might think, oh, this is a hack, like this is a trick. I can use these scales, so all I have to do is this. Just move the same shape. Yes, you could do that, but it kind of sounds terrible. Why? Because you're letting the fingers just kind of decide what notes you're playing. And it sounds too patterny and sounds too obvious. The trick is to hear it. It's kind of difficult to hear these scales. And if you can't do that, they're not gonna come out in your playing. So we want to make sure that we can hear the scales. Now if I practice ear training, if I play the whole chord, it's going to help me too much. So I want to practice like this, or I suggest that you practice like this. Just play the roots. And see if you can just sing these scales. Again, part of my singing, it's not going to sound good. Just trying to make sure that I have the notes in my head. So a G minor over C, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5, flat 7, flat 9. So I do it without the instrument, but I want to make sure that I'm hitting the right notes, so I'm checking a little bit every now and then. So you want to be able to sing the scale degrees, right? So flat 7, 11, flat 9, flat 5, sharp 5, flat 7, flat 9. Don't laugh at my singing. If I have a student who is kind of new to this, they would do this. They would see the C minor pentatonic, because that's the most strongest sound there. But it's not that, it's... And then they would do this. If they can't sing at all here, they would go... But it's... here you might go, but that's a D minor pentatonic. We're singing A minor. And if you can't hear those notes or imagine those sharps 11s and the altered notes, there's no way they're gonna come out when you're playing, because you want to be playing what you're kind of imagining in your head. And if you're not finding these notes mentally, they're not gonna come out in your playing. It's just gonna be this finger exercises, which sometimes can be useful. Sometimes we'll do that, and that maybe that's what you want, but I think you get my point. Let's make a little lick, 2-5-1 lick. Remember that? We're gonna use it over a tune in a second, namely, what is this thing called love? Let's move on to minor 2-5-1s. Dominant pentatonic. Then he does like a thing with rhythmic motifs, like motivic playing. Like that. Same rhythmic idea. That's a really cool concept, because when we play over minor 2-5-1, so this is a minor 2-5 to G, so A minor 7 flat 5, to D altered, D7 altered, to G minor 7. It's easy to kind of get trapped in the minor 2-5 lick material. This is so different, it gives you kind of a fresh... I find myself sometimes when I play minor 2-5 tunes like Woody and You, that I play the same stuff, just licks, but this is different because instead of thinking licks, we're thinking motifs, like rhythmic motifs and shapes, the pentatonic shapes. He also talks about like string skipping, so you can play like a, if we go back to the previous one with major 2-5-1. So I can think of like a shape and do string skipping and play like a motif. And then the next one. Alright, so what are the scales we're using here? Those were mostly C minor over A minor 7 flat 5, F minor over D7 altered, and then G minor over the G minor. Again, all the options are written out there. So, and remember, there are, on a diatonic chord, you can play 3 normal pentatonic minor scales. On the melodic minor chords, there are 1 normal minor pentatonic and then 2 dominant pentatonic. So they gives you all these options. So a page can look like this. Here he lists all these kind of combinations, so you can make up your own combinations. But I suggest you try not to do everything at once. Don't. The risk there is that you kind of just go through it and nothing kind of sticks. It's better to stay with one key and pick a combination of pentatonics that you like. Again, some of the pentatonics is going to outline the chord more than others. So, for example, if I have an A minor 7 flat 5, if I play C minor pentatonic, I'm not playing an A. And I'm also playing the B flat, which it really doesn't work that great. So that's an A minor 7 flat 5. If I play C minor pentatonic, that B flat, it's not the best note, but because the scale is kind of such a strong sound in and of itself, it still works. But if I drop the B flat to an A, I get a scale that outlines that chord more. Remember we talked about that, C minor 6 and A minor 7 flat 5 is the same thing essentially. But you might want to go for the normal pentatonic. As a side note, you could go up a step and play that dominant pentatonic a step up, right? So there is another dominant pentatonic that you could also play, but it's going to sound a little bit weird. But F dominant or G dominant pentatonic. I know John Scofield uses that kind of scale in the melodic minor situations. Then over the D7, you can play F minor. It might be easier to think of it as A flat major, right? Because that's a sub 5 of D. But again, we guitar players tend to think of minor over major pentatonic scales. And for the tonic minor chord, you have a whole bunch of options of different pentatonics. I'm sure you can figure it out. The most obvious would be G minor. If you play a G minor pentatonic, you'll get all the notes of the chord pretty much, but if you play, let's say, A minor pentatonic, it's going to give you a more open sound that doesn't outline the harmony, and it's more challenging for the ear. But, so, you know, you should be able to do both. So again, you want to make sure that you can sing all those scales over the chords. And here's a little tip, because this is pretty tricky, I have to admit. So what I like to do is, say I have an A minor 7 flat 5 like that, C minor, I think of the, like visually, if I can see this chord. I remember a workshop with Pat Metheny where he says like he sees little lights, imagine little light bulbs lighting up where the notes are, so I can see, here's an A minor 7 flat 5. Then if I can see the C minor chord, sorry, the C minor pentatonic, you see how that kind of chord is inside that scale kind of. So I take the top note of the chord and then I play the scale down. C minor pentatonic. Then I play the next chord, D7, sharp 9 for example. Okay, now do the same thing, now it's F minor. The last one is a no-brainer. There, C minor. But again, the dominant pentatonic scales work better here, like an F dominant over that chord. And then you can play an A flat dominant over the D. Really great. So I could play an F dominant over the first chord, A flat dominant over the D7 altered, and a C dominant over the G minor. Maybe something like this. We're gonna take that lick to the tune we're gonna do in a second. Let me just try to play those scales over these chords. Again, remember, want to try to play motifs. Again, so also if you kind of move the same shape, just again, it sounds not very, it's too obvious, but if you kind of can shift it in the opposite direction of how the chords are moving, for example, then that's more sophisticated. Another thing you can do if you want to develop that kind of motif thinking. Motific, is that a word? Is that how you say it? Motific? Take a pentatonic scale from the same root. The pentatonic having the same root. So you could play an F dominant over the first chord. F dominant pentatonic. F minor pentatonic over the D7, and F major pentatonic, which is D minor. Then you could play a phrase, use the same shape, just adjust it to the next pentatonic scale, so it would be something like maybe or so I'm thinking more about a motif, an idea, or you could do the string skipping. He talks about that. It's a chapter on string skipping. So the pentatonic kind of invites you to play larger intervals. However, if you're going to do that exercise I just did, you have to remember that we're thinking scale degrees, but it's the pentatonic scale degrees, not the diatonic scale degrees. So if I play something like, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's not the fourth of the diatonic, it's not a fourth, it's the fourth degree of the pentatonic scale. So if I go to the next one, it's the 2 in a minor pentatonic scale is actually a minor third, right? So it can be a little bit confusing, but it's worth the effort to kind of practice like that. All right, let's work on a tune already. What is this thing called love? So for the first chord, I'll play an E flat dominant, and then I guess it's an F sharp dominant, and then F minor 6 or B flat dominant. Then for the next 2/5, I'm gonna think of it as a major 2/5. I know most real books say it's a minor 2/5 going to major, but those chords are kind of up for grabs. You could just as well play major 2/5 on there. I think originally there were not even 2/5s, just dominant chords in that tune. So we have G minor 7 flat 5, C7 altered, F minor 6, D minor 7, G7 altered, and then remember we had this lick going up half step. So let's see what that sounds like. So I have my iReal Pro, and I have removed the piano in the mix, so it's gonna challenge our ears more. We need to be able to hear the harmony, and I changed the background to the Salsa Cuba Son Montuno 2/3. Same thing here. And we can play the dominant scale here. And here. Try to play something improvised, but think motif. String skipping. So when I'm doing this, I'm not trying to be flashy, I'm not trying to play all this fancy stuff, which the pentatonics could kind of, you know, if you think of Michael Brecker or someone that can just kind of shred what we're changes like this. I'm just trying to find these notes and try to find little motifs in this. More than anything else, I'm trying to get these notes into my system, in my ears. And these little etudes, very simple, that I made, you can find on my Patreon page if you become a subscriber on Patreon and support my work there. Thank you to all my patrons. There is some more stuff. As always, when I cover a book like this, I'm just scratching the surface. For many reasons, it would take too long to cover everything. And also, I don't want to give away the content of the book. And so I'm just showing you a little bit of the content of the book and how I think about these things. But a few more things. There are some pages with like patterns You know, you can play pentatonic scales like this. 6 notes. In different ways, or so different exercises like with pentatonic patterns. Kind of Eric Johnson sounding. I think he even does 5-note patterns. Yeah, there's something he calls the dominant 7th pentatonic velocity study. So technique exercises. He also talks about playing patterns in this kind of direction, which I'm sure you've all worked on. Yeah, there's these stretch fingering exercises. So when you play 2 adjacent pentatonic scales, you combine 2 boxes, right? With this, you get this. You get this kind of repeating alternate fingering for the same note, which you can use to create kind of interesting patterns, but it's kind of easy to hurt yourself because of all the stretching. But he has a few patterns like that, like this one. Let's move higher up on the fretboard. That's the shape, that's the pattern. If you do it with a dominant pentatonic, it's gonna get even stretchier. Yeah, maybe not recommended. I usually avoid that kind of playing because it kind of can hurt your fingers. I had the same issue when I lifted a Jesse Van Ruler solo a while back. If you saw that video where he was doing this kind of same thing. In that solo, he was doing that kind of stretch pentatonics as well, and I decided not to do that. But if you have long fingers, so I'm just showing you some of the stuff that is in here. So there's a lot of backing tracks too, like his tunes that are designed for applying these pentatonic concepts on. So again, Pentatonic Concepts by Steve Kahn, great book. And as always, when I make a lesson like this and I have PDFs, you can find them on my Patreon page if you become a subscriber there. And if you do that, you support my work and I can keep making these lessons. And I release a lesson every other Friday, and that's the only thing I charge for on Patreon. You also get Q&As every first Sunday of each month, and sometimes I make bonus videos and stuff like that, but there's no charge for that. I only charge for the lessons, if some people were asking me how that works. And with all that, I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I shall see you next time.